I've actually done a few so, like studies, like scientific studies. There's one that hasn't come out yet, and I'm like still not allowed to talk about it. Like fully, I can't really give too many details, but um, I can say it was the most detailed study that's ever been done
Mm.
by reputable scientists, and they brought me to their lab and they put me in this. They actually built a what could you like not like a I guess kind of like a Faraday cage, but it was like more. It was like soundproof. My cell phone had no service in it. Like it blocked all
All
anything.
electromagnetic
like
frequencies, yeah.
yeah, and there you go. Yeah, any
Mm.
electromagnetic anything, and they said that they designed the soundproofing to the standard that it has to be for like the CIA or the
Hmm.
FBI, like the way
Mm.
that they have to have their discussions. And it actually locked from the outside, which I didn't know. So when they put me in there, it was like this like contraption, it just sort of like locked from the outside, and I was like, I'm locked in this like tomb
Mm.
right now. Like it was kind of nerve wracking a little bit. But they had us do. It was me and some other mediums. They did us one at a time. I don't really know who else did it. Um, they had us do readings. It was like I think like triple blinded. Like they gave us just a name
Right.
of the sitter, and I don't even think the researcher knew anything about. I think they got the name that day. It was like how they they,
Hmm.
they blind stuff in
Was this
studies to make sure that there's no.
was this the Windbridge Institute?
No, it wasn't
No.
Windbridge. I'm technically not allowed to say who it
Right.
was just
Okay.
yet. I was actually telling people for a little bit. I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to tell anyone even where I went. And then I had it on my website, and one of the researchers or somewhere that I posted it, and one of the researchers was like, "Could you take that down until we publish the study, just
Mm.
in case like anyone hears about it and they try to cheat?" And I was like, "Oh my god, I didn't even think to not
Mm.
post it."
Mm.
But I've been able to talk about like what happened. I'm allowed
Yeah.
to do that. I just
Yeah.
can't say really where or anything. But I can't. I would love to come back on and actually talk about it when
When
I'm
it's done.
allowed.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that evidential stuff that actually happened while I was there. It was so cool. But the basically the way it was set up is that they used, I think it was fMRI. They made
Hmm.
like this like custom head cap that had like I think like 60 electrodes or something on it, and it took like an hour every day to like put this thing on my head.
Right. Yeah.
And they were measuring like your, I guess, brain activity as you're doing readings to see if there's any anomalous activity or anything that just looks strange. But they also were sort of grading your information that you gave to see if it was accurate in the first place. And I haven't gotten the results of that back yet, but I guess I'm allowed to say this. One of the researchers on the team actually emailed me about something else, and actually in the email he was like, just to let you know, he was like, your information, he was like, it was significant all on its own. He was like, without even the fMRI stuff, he was like, but I'll let you know that as time goes
Mm.
on. So I was like, oh, all right, like it's good to know that when I was put in this box and had no idea about anything. And
Mm.
I mean, the way that it works really for mediums, I'm a stickler really for validation. Like I know a lot of mediums will talk about like past lives and stuff like that, and I'm not. I don't not believe in that. I think there's a lot of good evidence for it, and my people have spoken to me about it. But there's really no way to kind of validate that. Like if I sit here and I'm reading you, and I'm like, you were a Roman soldier, and
Right. Yeah.
whatever BC. That's great, and if it resonates and it helps you, that's awesome. But like, there's no way to
There's no way of
like
validating that. No, not
right.
unless you
You
have,
really can't
not unless you have like
unless you
specific
were like
names and
Caesar,
yeah,
right?
unless you have specific names, what
Exactly.
they did, who they knew, and there are cases like that. But
It's
when it comes up in readings, it's generally going to be Joe Blogs off the street. There's no
right.
way of knowing who that
It's
was.
exactly, and
Mm.
most times I feel like the stuff that would come up is like you're a peasant somewhere. Like there's no
Yeah.
record of,
No.
So I don't, I really try not to go there, um, because I feel like I'm, believe it or not, like I am actually a skeptical person. Like I'm very much like that, like left brain sort of. I need proof, and
Mm.
I don't do this just because like I decided one day I was going to talk to dead people. It was more. It kind of started happening, and I was like, well, if you guys are there, you really got to prove it.
Mm.
I'll tell you about that in a second. But the point is that it's hard to do a reading on someone when you're not getting like the yes, no, could you let me know some more? Because the way that it works for me is like if I'm like everyone in my family's named Joe. I'm like one of like 10 Joes in my family across like 8 generations. Like I'm
Mm.
Italian. There's a million of us. No, everyone lives to be older. So like there's a lot of us.
Mm.
So if I ever go to a medium, which I don't usually, but if I do, and they said, I know you're Joe, but they're bringing up another Joe on the other side. I literally have like 6 of them. So yes, that's accurate. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'm there to say, could you give me some more? Because
Which
I don't know
Joe?
who that is yet.
Yeah,
Right. And
yeah.
then if they said, oh, it was the one who died from, this thing, and they said that they used to, I don't know, they smoked a lot or whatever, then I would know, okay, like that's my grandfather, or that's my uncle, or that's
Mm.
whoever. Um, Whereas, in that case, in the lab, like there's no feedback at all, really. So I was a little I, I knew that I was doing what I was doing because I've been doing it long enough to know what it feels like. You know what I mean? The communication versus just like making stuff up.
Mm.
Um, but it was still a little bit like, oh my god, like if I'm wrong, I'm gonna look really stupid in front of all these researchers. But I was kind of happy that they came back with that info. But it was interesting, actually. I will share a little bit of this. I ended up accidentally. It was not even on purpose. During because the way that the study worked, it was like you had a period where you had to report, and then you had a period where you received, and it was so that they could read the fMRI better. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Because when you're talking, I believe it can create artifacts, so they had to kind of like analyze it differently, and I
Yeah,
guess they had a
yeah.
timestamp on it, whatever it is. And Something came through actually for one of the researchers, and I was kind of sitting, and I reported it. I was like, I think this is for someone in the lab. I don't think this is for somebody, the sitter that I'm supposed to be reading. Um, but I was like, this is the a full 3 names came through, like first, last, middle, last, and the situation. And when I kind of got out of the tomb, whatever, I
Mm.
keep calling it the tomb because that's what it felt like,
Mm.
the cage or whatever. I had asked the researcher. I said, does this name make sense to you? And do you understand what the situation is? And he was like, yeah, actually, that's my so and so's name. It was like first, last, and middle. And he was like, wow. He was like, that's kind of wild. And then the message I gave him didn't make sense. I had said something had happened that day, and he didn't know about it, and it was in another state. And then when I saw him the following morning, he had picked me up to bring me to the lab for the last day of the research. He said to me, he was like, so that you were right. What you said happened had actually happened, and I didn't talk to. I think it was his wife that he had to call or something.
Mm.
And he was like, she gave me the story kind of word for word how you said it. It had happened, and I didn't know about it at the time. So I was like, oh, that
Mm.
was that for me. That was kind of it made me feel a little bit more comfortable because I know my job is to prove to people that I'm not some kind of like charlatan. I get that. Like I'm totally prepared to do that. But it's different when you're in a lab and you kind of have everyone looking at you sort of
Yeah,
like this, like, you know,
yeah.
it's like you're like a lab rat. You don't know if they're looking at you like, can this guy do what he can do? Or some people are looking at you like, oh my God, this, extrasensory, like X-Man kind of person.
Mm.
And I'm just there, like, trying to live
Yeah.
my life. So
It'd seem unlikely
it
that
kind of helped.
they'd be looking at you thinking, can this guy really do what he says? Because if they're studying this phenomenon, they're at least open to the ability itself.
That's true.
You know,
That's
and
very true.
it's uncommon to find people that are willing to research this kind of thing, especially with the Randys and the others who
Exactly.
have crapped on it effectively.
Right, right, quite a bit. And
Mm.
I really can't hold it against anyone for kind of being skeptical about it, especially like these skeptics. I mean, I'll freely admit this. I'm not a huge fan of like not skeptical people, but like the official skeptics in the
Mm.
world because it feels very like a fundamentalist religion at certain times. Like
Mm.
they're really unwilling to look at evidence, and I'm sure you've had this discussion many times on the
Mm.
show. Um, but I can't fully blame anybody because there's so many people who are just so full of it. Like when it comes to what I do, like I've met plenty of them that I'm like, you're lying. We all know you're lying. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
very clear. And then the other, a larger percentage of the people I think that say they do this and they can't or can't do it well, or people that are well intentioned and they just think that
Hmm.
they're, being a medium. Like there was, I'll give an example. For whatever reason, in 2018, I had like traveled a little bit. It was just I had a bunch of different opportunities. I was all over America, I was in California, I was in Arizona, I had visited family, I went on a couple of trips with friends, and for some reason, most of the places I went, I ended up being in like a town. Like I was in Salem, Massachusetts, so there's a lot of like psychics and stuff there.
Mm.
So I ended up getting a reading. I was in Sedona, Arizona. I don't know if you're familiar. I hear your accent, so I'm assuming you're
No,
in
I'm
another
over. I'm
country.
over in the state. I'm over in the United Kingdom. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know
I
much
figured, but
about the
I don't know
states.
if you. Yeah, Sedona's this town in Arizona that's it's very beautiful actually. But they have a lot of like new age
Mm.
culture there, and there's like every 5 steps you go, there's like a different store with like crystals and a psychic.
Right.
And
Okay.
I had gotten a reading in both of these places, and one of them was better than the other, and both of the people who read me were very nice. But I kind of came out of it, and I was like, oh, like I kind of get why people look at this stuff and they're like, ah, this isn't really. There's nothing to it because these were people who were reputable. That every in the neighborhood that
Hmm.
they were in,
Mm.
everyone was like, oh, go to this one, go to that one, and I was kind of like, not to toot my own horn, but I was like, I, you got to get more specific than this. Like, you
Yeah.
can't just be
Yeah.
like, so, all fluff and so general. Like, you gotta give something.
Yeah. It's all
So
very kind of
I
subjective as opposed to objective
yeah,
things you
and
can confirm. Yeah.
right, and I do sympathize with people who are skeptical about it, or at least unsure. I really can't hold it against anybody, but I will admit it does get frustrating at times because there'll be moments where I'll come out with like something that's so even I'm like, oh my god, like I can't believe that that's even real, and then you still get people that are like, oh well, he must have Googled you, or
Mm.
he must have done research, and I'm kind of like, uh, it's stuff that you can't even really Google.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's just certain people that you can't bring up enough, enough
Yeah.
stuff
The sort of
to
person
where
that
they'll accept
no
it.
matter how unlikely a physical explanation is, it must be a physical explanation, regardless of
Right,
there has to be a line to draw where you can start
right,
to think maybe it is something a bit more than that. You
right,
know.
exactly. And for I think for most legitimate mediums who really like try to work hard and bring through accurate information, um, it's frustrating. It's
Mm.
definitely frustrating, but
Mm.
it's part of the job.
Part of the process. I suppose a lot of people
Mm.
get skeptical when they see things on the television and everything where people are asking for a first letter of a first name or something, whereas they would think, well, if it is this person coming through giving messages, they should be able to give us information direct as if you were talking to the person themselves to tell exactly who you are,
Right,
and give very detailed information directly without need of
right.
interpretation. So how does it actually work for you?
You know what? So I actually hear that a lot, and I sympathize with people who think that, but I that's usually coming from a place of not understanding how the process works. So for me, and I think really for most mediums, I have a few medium friends, and we all kind of work. And Forever Family is very involved with them. The Forever Family Foundation. I'm sure Liz,
Mm.
you know
Mm.
about it,
I know of it.
talking to Liz
Yeah.
and stuff. And so it's really all symbolic. So it's most of the time, it's not like it may seem like the conversation we're having, like I'm talking to you and I could just like turn around and relay the message to someone else. It's not exactly like that. It's more like someone will come through and for me, I'll usually feel that's the only way I could describe it is that I'll feel the relationship. Like it'll feel like dad or it'll feel like a
Mm.
grandmother or I'll feel that it's someone in your generation. So I know it's like a spouse or a brother. It works for me and listen, sometimes it's immediate and it happens so clearly and so quickly and it does feel like a one-to-one conversation, and there's other times where I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, this could be a father or a grandfather. I kind of got to ask them for more, and then they'll tell me, like, they'll show me JA, so I know they had like a name that's like James or
Mm.
Jack, or you know what I mean. It's like kind of, so in those cases when it's a little bit more general, I myself will ask them like, all right, you got to give me a little bit more. Until you narrow it down.
Mm.
So that, for whatever reason, that's how it works. It's not always you hear things. I mean, sometimes I do. I'll admit, like once the energy's flowing and we really have a good connection, I could sit there and literally, it's like taking dictation. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just pictures. And
Mm.
and for instance, I'll give you a really good example. I want to say it was like maybe a month ago. I was reading this woman, and she had lost her. I think her dad had passed. I'm pretty sure, and her dad was actually coming through like very accurately, and it was very, like it was like I was dictating,
Yep.
which doesn't happen so often, and all of a sudden he showed me like a, you play a movie in your head or you imagine something.
Hmm.
And he showed me this, just a random person with a plastic bag scooping up a fish out of the water and then sealing the bag with the
Hmm.
fish in the water. So I like took a second and I was like, okay, what the hell could this possibly mean? But I just knew that it meant like a factory that packaged fish to like ship it out to be consumed all over the country, but not just like cans of tuna. Like, how you see those like vacuum sealed like
Yeah, like the
tuna steaks or
smoked.
like
Yeah, yeah,
right stuff
yeah.
like that. So now I'm like I feel like a lunatic, but I have to ask her what this like fish packing plant means in reference to her father. But I didn't know the situation. He just brought it up. So we were on the subject of her brother at the time, and I said to her, this is gonna sound crazy, but just what I explained to you. And she was like, "Oh my God!" She was like, "The last picture my brother and my dad have together are my brother brought my dad to this fish packaging plant that he lives a mile away from in Oregon, and it's like their last picture together." And she was like, "It's so crazy, like
Mm.
nobody would even know about that, like no one posted about it, whatever." So symbolically that's how it works. Like some people might have seen that image and not even understood what it meant. For whatever reason, I guess I was sharp that day and picked up what her father had meant. But
Mm.
I don't know why it works that way, and it's not just I'm hearing a voice in my head that says I went to a fish packaging plant with my son. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It would be
yeah.
much easier if that's how it worked, but I think it has a lot to do with the way our minds and consciousness works in general. Because if I think if you really kind of boil it down to like a fundamental level, we all kind of think symbolically anyway. Like
Hmm.
if you really kind of pick your own mind apart, you don't have to think in words. Like we're not always verbalizing in our own head. What's at least I'm not. You know what I
No,
mean? Like
no.
I feel like when you look at something or you, I guess even when you're having an emotion or some kind of realization about someone or something, it's not always in words. It's sort of just like a knowing. Do you know what
I
I'm
know what you
saying?
mean. I do. Yeah.
And I think that's how our minds work, like pre-language, because you could still think and realize
Hmm.
things and perceive even if you didn't learn a language. It's
Right.
possible. Um, you know what I mean? I feel like animals do it. Dogs have. I feel like dogs are pretty intelligent. I think they have emotional intelligence too, honestly. And I don't know if they have the words to verbalize that. If you could read a dog's mind, I think it's just more, like your perception. So I think that's why it works that way for mediums, because we're sort of having to translate like this intangible thing into like a verbal conversation. So
Mm.
I feel like it's almost like translating one language into another, and I don't know if you speak another language. Like I speak some Italian,
I speak a bit of
so some
Japanese, but not much.
but you know how sometimes you'll try to translate something and there's no exact
I do.
translation for
Yeah.
like a word or a sentiment in that
Yeah.
language. It's like a very cultural thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's sort of where that comes into,
Mm.
and I think for people who are much more in the materialist way of thinking, and sort of like, well, why, if you're talking to my mother, why can't she just tell you, A, B, and C and describe everything? And I'm like, I think the woman's trying. It's just I think I'm the limitation. If you really want to know, I don't think it has to do so much with the other side. I
Mm.
think it's more,
Yeah, I mean,
my
as
human brain.
as the medium, you're kind of having to garner on your own experiences and your own interpretations of things, as opposed to the
Right.
woman that you're getting through to. I mean, a good analogy is, if you had a conversation with a lion from the safaris of Africa who spoke
Hmm.
perfect English, you still wouldn't
Right.
have a clue what he was talking about because his frames of references are so far removed from your own.
So different. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And I do think that in itself is sort of evidential if you do the research about afterlife in general, because if you talk to people who have NDEs, they sort of say the same thing about their experience. Like when they're trying to describe it, they'll tell you like, there really are no words for it, but
Mm.
this is as close as I can get. So I think that whole realm is just sort of hard to translate
Yeah, it
into
is. And
physical.
although with NDEs, although the foundations are exactly the same, you'll find that they talk about it from their own religious point of view. If they see a
Right.
spiritual entity, an atheist will say, I saw a being of light, whereas a Christian will say, I saw Christ. Or a
Right, right,
Hindu will
right, right,
say, I saw
exactly.
whoever. And yeah, and then the afterlife realms are very indicative of their religious beliefs, although they are generally the
Right.
same description. So it is very dependent
Yeah, I
on,
think it's
yeah.
well, I think it's I sort of have learned through my work, I think the language of the universe, I guess you could say, is sort of symbolic. You know what I mean? Like I
Mm.
think that's really how it all works. And if you want to get philosophical about it, I mean, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, or whatever the quote is.
Mm.
You know what I mean? From
Mm.
from Shakespeare, that's really about symbolism. It doesn't matter what you call something. It's everything's a representation of everything else, and it's you can really go down like a rabbit
Yeah,
hole
yeah. I
there.
mean, with Shakespeare, I never have a clue what that bloke's talking about, to be honest. But
Correct.
yeah, I
Very
mean, I
confusing,
get the
but
point. Yeah.
so I do think that's I think it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's good evidence of sort of being. It all goes along with the rest of the research, but at
Mm.
the same time, it's a hard thing. But also too, I feel like depends on sort of the medium you're talking to as well. Like I really try to get myself out of the way in a reading. Like it's the I think the best mediums understand that. Like I know some mediums who actually can do what they claim to do, and they may have passed the same test that I did and things like that. But I kind of feel like their own, like you're the filter, basically. You're filtering someone else's consciousness, so your filter kind of gets in the way. And I've seen it happen before, where like I'm watching a medium do a reading, and they get information, and then knowing them personally, I'll see their own issues kind of bleed into the reading, and they're like
Mm.
giving the person from their point of view what they think like the spirit on the other side is trying to tell them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
not everyone
Yeah.
has the same issues that you do. Like you
Yeah.
kind of gotta. So I think that's where it's just so hard to research this stuff, and because people are so difficult in
Indeed.
general. So
Indeed.
it's like
Yeah.
you're dealing with the person sitting in front of you getting the reading. You're dealing with the medium.
Mm.
Excuse the banging. I don't know. It's
That's
either
all right. That's not a problem.
outside
And I
or.
mean, we see a lot. I mean, I spoke with Dr. Chris French recently, who's a
Mhm,
prominent skeptic in Psi, and you also have, because you're
mhm,
dealing with direct consciousness and minds,
mhm.
you're dealing with not only kind of the data that you're working with, but also the influence of the minds that are doubting and the minds that are believing, and how they influence the results as well. The
Right.
sheep goat effect.
Right, and you know what? That's so true, and this is something that I actually struggle with again because I am a skeptical person. So, I, my journey sort of started with this just happening to me. Like I would just know something about someone, or I'd feel whoever around them, and I would say something to them, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, my husband's name was Gary," and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, bye." It kind of freaked me out, and I would just kind of step back for a minute. But I said to them, if you're real, like you really got to prove this to me. Like this, I can't just like dive into this. Like I need this shown that this is real. And there were so many examples in that first year of me doing this that I was like, at a certain point, I was like, all right, Joe, like it's borderline madness to actually pretend this isn't happening. Like,
Yeah.
come
Yeah.
on. But that's a good point. That even now, like I not that I question if it's real or not, because I know I know it's there. Like I have too many experiences
Mm.
and my own. I do many readings a week, so I'm not really. I'm
Mm.
kind of past that. But I will say, um, listening to skeptics and even sometimes conversations within like the scientific community for people who are proponents of consciousness being non-local and not produced by the brain, it sort of brings my, I don't know how else to say it, like my vibration or my energy, my consciousness sort of gets like downgraded a little bit. And it brings me back to the physical world because I struggle with it because I'm like, well, why should that be something that's like affecting my readings or my ability to
Mm.
kind of connect with the other side? But I think it's really because to do this, I can only describe it in sort of new age terms because there's no real scientific language
Yeah.
for it. But the way that it's been described, and I think this is also sort of metaphorical, but they say that for us to communicate, we sort of have to raise our consciousness, whatever that means, or raise our vibration. And I can only describe that from an internal point of view, and that is a real thing that happens. Like you could feel that. It's if you meditate at all or do yoga, you'll probably know the feeling that I'm talking
I've
about. It's
felt
that sort
it.
of like
Yeah.
connected, sort of
Hmm.
very peaceful bliss sort of thing that you feel. You kind of have to get into that headspace. And then apparently they say, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but that the consciousness on the other side sort of has to like slow their vibration down to sort of meet you halfway, which makes sense to me, I guess. So that's why they say, the connection sometimes isn't always as easy or as fluid because, you don't know who you're connecting with. But I think it's
Mm.
more the medium, honestly,
Mm.
like, and the sitter, I think it's more the living people. But sometimes, it's really why I try not to pay too much attention to skeptics, because they're not gonna tell me anything I haven't heard them say already. Like, I've heard every argument. I get it. And I don't think I'm going to change anybody's mind, because I feel like a diehard skeptic is, I could tell them their social security number and their grandmother's, and they'd still,
Yeah, well,
tell me
I
that
mean, folks like
you
that,
know,
they're not. I mean, if you have to describe them as diehard skeptics, they're not skeptics, because
right.
skeptics
That's like more
are,
of a
yeah,
fundamental.
skeptics will doubt, but will be swayed by evidence.
Right,
Cynics
right,
and
right,
doubters, or not, well, not even doubters, but cynics and scoffers and people that are just so
right.
set in their
Yeah, it
belief.
is a little.
As you say, it is almost cusping on a religious movement.
Yeah, and it is a little
Yeah.
cynical. You're right. It's less skeptic and more cynic. But
Mm.
listening to that, sometimes it does get in my head a little bit, and then I start to play that, like, I guess it's like sort of like an ego thing, where, like, I have to be right, or I have to, you know what I mean? Like,
I
I
do.
kind of stop paying attention and putting my energy in the place that it's supposed to be. And it's been a long sort of journey figuring out, like, how to navigate all that, because, again, as a sort of left brain scientific minded person, I want to hear the counter arguments so that I can
Mm.
better myself and do better. But at the end of the day, you kind of just have to, like, doing this work is really, you have to work on yourself. You have to kind of step out of your own way and just, like,
Yeah.
not really focus on any of that, and leave the research to the people who really should be doing it. Because at the end of the day, like,
Yeah.
I can only, I gotta stay in my lane, you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Mm.
In order to really do it as best as possible. But it's hard for me, because I'm a curious person, and I
I
think the
know.
best mediums are a little skeptic and a little bit curious. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the best mediums, or even the best scientists, or the best kind of skeptics, really will be skeptical of their own worldview and their own experiences,
Right,
and
right.
will
You
attempt
gotta
to
be.
explain them away first. That should always
Right,
be the default, and when you're left with no other possibility, then you
right.
begin to, I mean, I'd love to see these people that say that research in mediumship and any sort of psi experience is unscientific. I'd like to see
Right.
what would happen if they'd walk into their house, their own house alone, and see a kettle floating in midair.
Hmm.
What would they do then? Would they then say that's
Right,
unscientific because it's the same with mediumship. If you are very scientifically minded, but you have an experience that can't be explained away, something
right.
so accurate, it's like having that happen. It happened. You can't deny that it happened. What do you do with
Right.
it now?
What are you supposed to do with it?
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where I'm coming from with it. Like, I always tell people, I am not a medium because I want it to be. I really didn't. Like,
Mm.
honestly, this was not. I was in school for music. Like, I wanted to write songs and sing. Like, that's always been my love and my passion. I never thought I'd be, like, talking to dead people for a living. You know what I mean?
No.
Having my brain studied. Like, that's just the last thing I thought. I mean, I come from a family that's actually very much into this, and I have other mediums in my family, and I grew up around it, but I was really the only one that was skeptical. I was kind of like, I don't know about this. But
Mm.
then, like so many other people, I had my own experiences, and I really think that's the only way to truly know that this is there. You got to have your own experiences. I mean, the
Indeed.
research can only do so much, I believe, but at the end of the day, anyone that I know who's like, yes, this is there, there's something to it, has always had their own experience. Like,
Hmm.
you just have to. It's believing is seeing in this
It
situation,
is, yeah,
and
and I think that's the one thing that's missing from my life to turn me from believing it's there to knowing it's there, because I will never be 100% certain unless something
right,
happens to me that I can't say. I can always look at a video of a paranormal experience, and I can always say there could have been wires, there could have been this, there could have been that. No matter how definite the person is that they were the only ones in the house and they didn't do anything,
right,
I could always say that. But until I know the situation myself and it happens to
exactly. You
me,
can't.
there's no way of 100% being convinced. And if you
Right,
are, then
exactly.
you're religiously thinking. You're not thinking in terms of science.
Right, you're
You
not.
know,
It's not a critical thinking. Yeah,
no.
but that's so true. I mean, I'm at the point where I am. Listen, I'm open to if somebody proved that you do not survive after death, and listen, then I guess I've been psychic this whole time, because
Mm,
I know that there's definitely something non-local happen. I mean, I don't believe that. I really feel that I know that it's
mm.
it's there, because I don't have any, again, like, scientific proof, but I can feel the difference between when I'm just reading someone's energy or having, like, a precognitive moment versus talking to
Yeah.
someone's child on the other
Yeah,
side.
and
Like, it's
that's
very
one of
different.
the questions, isn't it? Whether mediumship is a genuine connection with a non-local kind of
Hmm.
non-bodied consciousness, or whether it is a form of super psi, which is
Right.
reading from living people and not actually evidence to suggest that consciousness continues after
Right.
death. What do you think about that?
Well, you know what? I think in certain cases, like with very basic information that a medium could bring through, you could argue the super psi. You know what I mean? Very easily. But then there's such a. I'll give you two examples from my life, where I was like, I was actually at it was a time I was questioning quite a bit.
Mm.
So I'm glad this stuff had happened. I I was dating someone, and he had told me about his childhood dog that had just been put to sleep like that day. And he had the dog for like 15 years, but he
Mm.
obviously moved away from home, and he I forget exactly what the situation was, but I think he felt guilty about leaving and not taking the dog with him. It was something like that. So he was like, "Could you talk to the dog?" And I was like, it's kind of hard for me. Like, I'm not a big animal communicator as it is. Like, I love dogs here, but like they don't
Mm.
always come through to me. And I was like, why? I said, I was like, it's very real. I said, so why don't you do what I do? And I said, why don't you ask the dog? I was like, I know this sounds crazy. I was like, but ask the dog on the other side if you're there and you're okay and everything. Send me this very specific sign. So he said, okay, I want to ask him. He like said this out loud to me. It was just me and him in his apartment. He said, I want to ask him to send me a cartoon pencil drawing, or he was like, it can't be like crayon. It's got to be like a realistic like drawing of a dog.
Mm.
So I said, okay, fine, ask for it. Literally, like 4 hours later, a friend of ours came over and she took her shoes off and she had two different socks on. And she was like, oh, she was like, I can't believe I put two different socks on. And one was like a regular sock, and the other one it was printed, but it was like pencil drawings of little dogs, like
Mm.
on the
Mm.
socks. So he saw it and he was like, and I had said to him, I said, I said, this particular friend's coming over. I think for some reason she's going to give you the sign. So when she had the dog socks on, he was like, oh my God, okay. He was like, well, I guess this stuff's real. And, and
Mm.
that was it. And I was like,
Mm.
for that form of super psi to have happened, she put those socks on in the morning. So it would have had to have been, uh, one of our minds would have had to go back in
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
mind control her to put on two different socks.
Mm.
Then one of us would have had to like know to bring this up to the other one. You know what I'm saying?
I
Like
do. I do.
it would have been
It would have
so
been hard
many,
pressed.
right. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, in this case, if you want to say it's coincidence, that's fine. I feel like the odds of that happening are insane, but okay. But if we're gonna go the a more non-local explanation, I feel like the more simple one is just the request was answered. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
and
And
I've had a similar experience. I'll tell you about mine with my two dogs. I lost them both on the same day to two different
oh
reasons.
no.
We had to put them both down, and where I lived, I mean, my favourite animal has always been the fox,
Hmm.
and where I lived in this particular house, not this one, but the last one, for 24 years. Never seen a fox. And I said to Ty and Naomi once they went, I said, send me one. Send me a,
Hmm.
not just a fox, but a tame one, because that just adds a level
Hmm.
of unlikeliness.
Right.
And after we lost them, me and my mum would go out for walks at night, just to try and clear our heads each night. And nothing happened for a while. And then within a week, we saw a fox run across the road. And I thought, well, A, it wasn't tame. It just kind of darted across. I mean, I'd never seen a fox in 24 years of being there, but then I'd never really been out at night either. Mum was always out at night walking the dog, and she said she never saw anything, so I'm taking that into consideration.
Okay.
But I thought, okay, fair enough, but we won't take much notice. Nothing happened. I asked again, send me another one, see what happens. Within another 3 days, a second one ran out in front of us, even closer.
Oh.
And I thought, okay, that's getting a bit unusual now.
Right.
But I won't think much of it because I've never been out really at night, so I wouldn't have seen any if they were around. But two in a couple of weeks is unusual.
Right.
Third time I asked, third time I was always asking every time we went out.
Right.
And third night we were out, and my dad came along with us. And every time my dad came out, nothing interesting ever happened. So I said to them that night, I said, if you can send me one now, that would be pretty definitive.
Hmm.
And within 30 seconds of me thinking that, the third and closest one ran across the road. And I thought, okay,
Right.
this is now beyond,
Now it's getting weird.
after
Yeah.
0 in 24 years and then 3 in 4 weeks.
Right.
I can't
Right.
really
Right.
say that's much more than, and dealing. I never told Mum, I never told Dad that I'd asked for this to happen because I didn't want that to be an
Hmm.
influence.
Right. Right. Right.
And so I can't really see that as being anything else other than the influence from Ty and Omi influencing
Right.
kind of
Right.
nature. And it's not even a case of influencing somebody, it's influencing nature. So
Right.
I can't
Right.
see a
Right.
super psi explanation for that outside of
Right.
they just happened to be many foxes out that night because of the lockdowns or something. But in 24 years,
Right.
never seeing them, I couldn't really reason that away.
Right. And you know what, I think that honestly I would have taken that as a sign after the third one. I'm
Mm,
kind of like that too. Usually if I get a sign, I'm like, all right, give it to me again, So
mm,
so I really know. And I always joke, I like when I die, I'm gonna get there and they're gonna like kick the crap out of me because I've I really like have made
yeah.
them, I put them to work. But my whole issue with Super Psy really, and I've never really heard anyone else say this, and maybe this is naive of me, but I feel like at a certain point, it's not only do I feel like it's borderline a little absurd, like as it when it's these complicated situations, it sort of borders on like mind control a little bit because
Mm,
you have to like make people like I would be the one making somebody like bring this up, do this, do you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah, I know
there's
what
been
you mean.
situations where there was another one it was actually around the same time, and I had asked my guides for a little bit more evidence that they were there, and I asked them to send me. I don't know if you've read the book The Alchemist, if you've ever heard of
I
it.
know of it. I've never read it.
You know what? I had a crazy situation happen with that as well. I could tell you that story too, but I'll fast forward. It's a very important book to me, and sort of on my the beginning of my journey. And I had asked my guides to send me that word. I was like, if you guys are really there, send me this word. The alchemist. I said, but you can't make me see it like on some like spiritual Instagram or
Hmm.
like one of
Hmm.
my medium friends. Like I was like, it's got to be in like the dumbest place you could
Yeah.
possibly think of. So there's this candy store in Manhattan called Dylan's Candy Bar, and it's trash. The candy's horrible quality. But my ex used to live on. It was on the corner of his block, and I had literally never been in this place. I think maybe one time I went inside on a cold night to wait for an Uber, and then I left. I'm not a fan, and so I didn't tell anyone that I thought this. And the next day, I was with him, and we were I don't know at Home Depot getting something. It's I don't know if you have home. It's a hardware store. We're at the hardware
Yeah.
store, and I keep forgetting you're in the UK. And he was like, "Oh, why don't we stop in Dylan's and get candy?" And I was like, "Oh, all right, whatever." So we go into Dylan's, and I'm like protesting the whole time, like I don't want anything. I'm being such a like a pain in the ass about it because I don't like their candy. And they have this wall in the basement. It's like this glass case, and they have these little like glass boxes that you could see what kind of candies in
Hmm.
it. And they had celebrities come to the store and put their favorite candy in it, and then they put the celebrities like picture and
Right.
they
Yeah.
show like what kind of candies they like, and they have like over 100 of these in this like on multiple shelves from like
Mm.
floor to
That in a
ceiling.
display case. Yeah.
Right. For whatever reason, I decided to look up in the far left corner, and I had to like stand on my tippy toes because I'm really not that tall. I'm only like 5'7". So I'm like on my tippy toes looking, and I've never heard of this person in my life, but some rapper named The Alchemist made a candy box there. Meanwhile, he's in the same case with like Ellen DeGeneres and Oprah and
Uh-huh.
like Julia Roberts. You know what I mean? I'm like, who's this guy? So I saw that and I was like, oh my God, like in a candy store? So
Yeah.
and it was funny too. At the time I had seen it, I remember it was 6:44 at night. And oh, it's funny. It was just 44. 44 is like my number that my guides told me when you see it. Like that's how you know we're around. So I had happened to see it at that time, and I was like,
Yeah.
"There's no like I didn't tell anybody about this." So for me, I was like, if this were a super psi example,
Mm.
I would have had to implanted the thought. First of all, I would have had to divine the location of, you know what I mean? Like I would have
Hmm.
had to
Mm.
somehow figured out that this was there on this corner in this candy store, assessed it that it was obscure enough for me, then made my ex at the time want to go in there. And I'm like, do I have this power over people? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's like a.
And
I feel like for that to be,
it's quite
you
funny
know,
as well because as you were telling me that story, it's currently 6:45 p.m. here.
right. Oh, is
Yeah.
it? How funny.
Yeah.
I looked up. It was 1:44 as I was saying it. I was like, oh, how
Yeah.
funny.
There's six. It would have
Um,
been 6:44 here as you were saying that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But just that's why I'm like sort of just logically, from the not even like in the knowing that I have within myself, logically, I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not really
You
tracking for
gotta
me.
you gotta look. What's more likely? Okay, say
Right.
you don't believe that this sort of thing exists. What's more likely that all these kind of as mediumship as well as all the other lines of evidence of a non-local consciousness that all point to the same direction? Is it more likely that it's all wrong, it's all
Right.
fraud, and that there's some kind of physical explanation that just no one's recognised yet, or is it more likely that
Right.
maybe these things are pointing to something in a universe that we don't know pretty much crap about, that there's something we've missed
Correct.
that we don't know yet that exists? I'd say that
Right.
seems more likely to me, given the evidence.
I think I right. Exactly. Given the
Mm,
evidence, because if you look at the stuff that we're talking about, and then the NDE stuff, and just everything, it none of it really points to the super psi explanation.
no.
But again, we can't rule that out 100% either. So, I don't think that that's the case. But if someone were to prove that, listen, you've just been like an excellent psychic for years, I'd be like, okay, well, you know what? I guess when I die, I'll disappear, but at least I'll die knowing, I wasn't fully crazy.
Yeah,
But
indeed.
at this point, just my own experiences, I know that at the very least, people are psychic. You know what I mean? Like, even if you want to throw the whole survival of consciousness out the window, which again, I'm not a,
Mm,
I know it's there, but just all the things that I mean, the readings I've done, the really good ones. I mean, even the mediocre ones, I feel like sometimes I'm like, I discredit that because I'm very critical.
mm,
Because I always want more evidence. But just, I mean, even some of the other mediums that I've seen do readings, like friends of mine and stuff at
yeah,
conferences and things,
yeah.
I'm like, there's just no way that these people. I mean, uh, there have even group readings that I've attended. Like, mediums will do these like groups of like 10 people, and most of the time you're in correspondence with the person hosting, and you don't even know who's showing up, so you can't even use the Google. You know what I mean?
Mm,
They can't even use that because you don't even know who's attending these things. You're just showing up at a
yeah,
stranger's house and hoping
yeah,
they're not going to murder you, and
yeah.
you're going to do the reading.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I mean, you can always make an argument, especially for television mediums, which is unfortunately where most people get their
Yeah,
opinions from. That it's edited very sympathetically. It will be.
right. It really is. It really is.
B, you can't tell if there are Confederates there asking around trying to get. You don't know if people are having to fill out forms to say why they're there, who they're expecting to get
Right,
through.
right, right.
So you can't take anything on the television, on YouTube, on the internet at face value because you weren't there. You don't know how it's been edited, and you don't know what took
Yeah,
place.
that
But as you say, when it's at a friend's house or even a stranger's house, even better.
right,
Um,
because
the only thing
you
you could
just don't
say,
know.
are there hidden microphones? Maybe, but then if you don't say anything, you can at least control that because you're there.
Exactly. Well, I had just sharing another experience, just real quick. The first medium I ever went to was in a group of like, I think it was like 13 people, and it was right after my best friend's mom had passed away, and she was not about mediums at all. She was like, she knew me and my other friend were going, and she was like, "Don't even ask about me." I obviously asked about her, and this woman brought forward information that I didn't even know, that nobody knew about, how her mother was actually sending her signs, a particular
Mm,
sign, and I sort of brought it up to my friend in a roundabout way without telling her that I just brought it up in general to see if she would
mm,
say anything about it. And instead of just being like, oh, my mom liked these or blah, 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 whatever, she actually said, like, oh, so and so thinks that my mom is sending me this symbol. And everyone who was in attendance at this group reading was like, oh my God. Because
mm,
not only did this woman not know that I was going there, but I asked about someone that, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was so many degrees of separation that you couldn't use, and it was something that no one even knew. Only her and one other person knew about this. So it was
right.
like,
Yeah.
again, could it have been super psi? I guess, but like, after once that happened, that was sort of and that happened years before I actually knew I was a medium. But
Mm,
once that happened, I was like, there's definitely something to this. I was like, this can't just be, cold reading, or
no.
it's just no
No.
way, no way.
No. Absolutely not. One thing that I'm sure you've heard a lot that would, I suppose, drive people away from believing you personally as a medium
Hmm.
is genuine is if they go onto your site and they'll see
Hmm.
that private sessions will cost them
Hmm.
$280 for 40 minutes.
Right.
They'll say
Hmm.
that's excessive. What
Right. Right. Right.
what do you think to that kind of idea?
Well, for two, but I mean, number one, I feel like most of these people who say that, just don't believe in mediumship at all.
Hmm.
Um, and you don't really know, like, how much it takes out of me, like what I have to do to prepare. Like this is my time and my life. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like it's not just like I'm deciding to charge for it because I feel like, oh, like I want to be, like a crazy amount of money.
mm.
Like number one, in the industry, that's actually like kind of cheap for who. Not, again, not to sound egotistical, but I've been tested. Like
Yeah,
most mediums haven't. Like I could
yeah. No,
actually be
you've
getting a
got
lot
the
more, but I do not.
credentials. Yeah,
Right, like most mediums just hang up a shingle and they say, "All right, I talk to dead people," and they start charging $300. Like
mm,
I've done the work to really legitimize myself. That's number one, and number two, I it kind of like pisses me off when people say that because I'm like, what about doctors? Like
mm.
people will say, "Oh, well, you're helping people and you should be, not charging anything." Skeptics love to say that. Well, why
I've
would they
heard that
charge?
a lot.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, don't you go to the doctor and pay an exorbitant amount of money to go have a surgery? Like
Mm.
even you'll have insurance and you still owe thousands of dollars. And this man is literally like removing a cancerous tumor,
Yeah.
but you're in medical debt. And
That
I'm
wouldn't
like, no
necessarily
one.
work in the UK with the NHS, but in the States, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
that's how this works here,
Mm.
and I'm like, nobody questions if the doctor is really doing a good job or being an honest person. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
people have to eat, I have to live. Like, I'm a human. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm.
and this really does take a lot out of me. Like, people think like, oh, you don't work long hours and you don't know, and I'm like, you don't understand what it is. Like, some days I wake up and I could have only like two clients, but leading up to it, I'm like so drained, and then I get there and the client's either super difficult or they've lost
Yeah.
three children and their husband is on hospice, and I like it literally takes up my entire day, even though I can only work for like 2 hours
Mm.
because it's draining. I have to be in the right state of mind. Like I can't do too much to take me out of the zone. There's so much to it. So I really stand by like what mediums charging what they want, because I'm charging for my time. It's not, you know what I mean? Like it's
Mm.
it's not even and again, I think that just comes from a place of people who don't value it. Most people who value mediumship and have done the research and know that I'm credentialed, or really any other medium, if you know that they're good, most people don't mind paying it because they know that they're getting a genuine service. Do you know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
And the other thing is really, which I know this is kind of a stupid reason, but from a business point of view, if I was out here charging like $40 and I was a certified medium with Forever Family, and I've done this other research thing that I'm dying to talk about but can't. No one would take me seriously if I was charging $40 or fifty
Mm.
dollars for like an
Mm.
hour. You know what I mean? Like
I know what
they
you
would
mean.
just equate
Yeah.
me with like any other like gypsy that has a crystal ball on the street and isn't legit. So you kind of have to. There's so many reasons for it, but my main reason is just like I feel like I'm worth it, and you wouldn't give a doctor a hard time about charging
No.
you for a visit. Like what? And I'm not saying that I'm equating myself to a doctor. Obviously, we do very different things, but the point is that we're both helping. So why is it okay? It's just the stigma attached to it. Really,
Yeah.
is
It
what I
it
think.
is. It is. Yeah. It's the common belief that all mediums are frauds. That because
Right.
you charge, no matter what you charge, it's a fraudulent amount because it's by default already a fraud. I mean, that was a
Exactly.
good example. I was speaking with someone a while ago who we were doing a review for the Surviving Death documentary, the Netflix
Oh
one,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
which didn't really show mediums in a good light.
Oh
But
no, I honestly I watched it and I was mortified because I knew some of the mediums in it, and I
yeah,
was like, oh man, like all the other episodes were great, but the medium episodes, I was like, thank God I wasn't asked to be in this because
yeah,
I would have
I
been
must
so
say, I
upset.
mean, Liz was saying about Laura Lynn Jackson being a very genuine medium, and to me,
She really is actually.
when I was watching that Netflix series, I would have come away with that thinking she was
Can I tell
completely a
you,
fraud. You know.
Laura's a good friend of mine. I've read Laura read me one time the first time I met her, and she told me something that I didn't even know about. Actually, she told me two things. She told me my grandfather had one testicle, which he did, and he used to joke about it and tell everyone about it all the time. But my
Mm,
grandfather died in 1995, so there was no way she could have known that.
mm,
And she told me about my mother doesn't have much of my grandfather's stuff, but my mom has his shoes, and I didn't even know this. And she told my grandfather told her. So I've seen Laura do amazing readings. She is
yeah,
amazing. But I will agree with you. As Laura's a good friend of mine. Like I love Laura. And when I watched that documentary, I was like, oh no. I was like, they
yeah.
really did. They
I
they did
think
not portray her.
no, anyone would have walked
And
away from that thinking she was not
yeah,
genuine.
I was
Yeah.
actually very upset about it because I was like, I have seen her work firsthand, and I've seen her do such incredible readings, and
Mm,
this was like Not again, if I didn't know her, I would have been. I wouldn't have been buying any of it, honestly.
No,
If I didn't,
no,
if I wasn't a medium myself,
no. I mean,
it really wasn't evidential.
the Tommy Boy part of it just completely
Uh,
drained all the legitimacy out of the window
mm,
for me.
you know what? I happen to know. I don't know Leslie Keane, the woman who wrote the
Mhm.
book Surviving Death. I read her book, but I know through Forever Family she's worked with them, and I know a few people who know her. And her work is legit. Like she really, she. I know she had readings with Laura, and if I don't know if you read the book, but Laura was actually in the book, and the reading that she detailed in the book was so much more evidential than
Mm.
what was shown on this TV show. But I did hear this may be a rumor, but they let Leslie consult on the Netflix version of it. But I think on the Medium episodes they didn't. I heard that they didn't take her advice or didn't let her
Yeah,
consult as, and
no,
they took that. They, honestly, that to me looked like typical TV BS. Like
yeah,
they
it
just went for
did.
the most sensational,
Yeah,
provocative. Let's make people doubt
that
it.
was they were episodes of entertainment. You could tell that Les
Yeah,
didn't
those
have much influence on that.
those weren't great. But I
Yeah,
thought the other episodes
the
were
other ones
done
were
very
brilliant.
well. Yeah,
Yeah,
they were great.
but
Yeah.
the point I was going to come to, which I forgot, was yeah,
Sorry.
that was my fault. We started talking about Tommy Boy.
Yeah.
We were doing a review for it, and one of the guys that I was with, one of the skeptical guys, said,
Hmm.
well, don't you think it's immoral? So we were talking about mediums, and he was saying, well, don't you think it's immoral that these people are preying on well, he in fact said, because I'm very proud of my abilities to be a
Hmm.
skeptic. I think
Right.
I'm pretty switched on. And he said, well, if you are, as you say, a skeptic, why don't you consider that these mediums that are preying on grieving people are taking money from them?
Hmm.
And that, to me, that shows a very strong presupposition there, because he's saying that it's already known that it's false.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I said to him, well, that's not how I'd approach it. I'd first determine if they were genuine or not. If they turn
Right.
out to not be genuine and are taking money deliberately knowing what they're doing as fraud, then yes, of course, it's immoral.
Right. Then it's immoral.
But
Exactly.
the fact that they're charging means that they're making a living. It doesn't mean that they're immoral. Because as you say, doctors in the US would be incredibly immoral,
Right.
but they're not. And if they turn out to be genuine, no, I don't think it's immoral, because if they're genuinely talking to the deceased people and they're genuinely helping people over their grief, I don't see that as immoral in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
unless you have that
I
presupposition.
exactly. I think that's just where it comes just from the feeling like that it's just everyone's fake and
Mm,
we're all hucksters and again
yeah,
if that's what you believe then then it would appear immoral.
and it's a
It
reasonable
makes sense.
position. It's a reasonable position to take if you've never looked at the research.
Right. Well, I think that's what honestly most of it is. Like, I think most people that are truly skeptical either haven't had the research, they've only been to fake mediums. I
Mm,
have this conversation with our good friend Liz often about this stuff. And, we talk about the skeptics quite often because we're both sort of, Liz more so than myself, a little focused on it, but I am too. And we always say that, knock on wood, they've never really tried to take down any legitimate mediums that we know of. It's always these people who are like very clearly fake. You know what I
yeah,
mean? And
yeah,
and I wonder if there's a reason for that. Like if it's just sort of like the low hanging fruit, and they're like, oh well, this one's obviously easy to expose, so we're going to expose them. Whereas all the Forever Family mediums, we've been put through a test, and our accuracy's been graded, and it's a whole process really that most people don't. They don't pass the
yeah,
test,
yeah.
which I didn't know when I went into it, thank God, or else I probably would have freaked out. uh, I think it would be a lot harder to kind of catch us because if you put all this fake information out there that you expected us to regurgitate, none of us are googling you, or you know what I
No,
mean. So
no.
I think on some level they kind of leave the actual legitimate people alone, because whether they believe we're legitimate or not, I think they just know that it's harder to
Mm.
catch us. You
Mm.
know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many, shows that I've seen that focus on, at least have episodes on disputing mediums. And as you say, they always get the fake ones that are clearly
Right.
faking it and
So
clearly out
right,
there. And because it sells.
right. And you know what I've seen too, actually, on I forget what late night show it was in the U.S. I can't remember. Maybe it was Stephen Colbert. I can't remember, but it was a late night show, and they actually used a clip of Laura Jackson. I felt bad because so Laura was on this TV show with two other mediums that I know. One of them being my good friend Kim, and she showed me the unedited footage when we were just having lunch one day. She was like, "Oh, look at the unedited footage," and she had done fabulous readings. There was no way that she could have known this stuff. Like even the host was like, "Oh my god, this is great." The other medium, I forget the reading that she did, and then Laura did a reading, and it was actually pretty good. I had seen it was evidential. The unedited version. So they edited it, and obviously they cut out certain parts, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I actually don't think they edited it very favorably. It was sort of like honest. They just cut out some other stuff. But on this late night show, they were ragging on mediums. They did a whole segment on it, and they actually had taken this like 2 or 3 second clip of Laura saying something totally out of context, and it looked like she was just like fishing for information.
Yeah.
And I was like, see, this is also the stuff that they do. Like even if it, again, it's television. It's just all, you can't really rely on the TV stuff.
You can't. I mean, there was one I saw with John Edward, and he was saying about he was fishing for information. I mean, not in a negative way, but this is the whole point of context. He was fishing for information, saying, I got this image of outer space. Did he watch Star Wars? Did he watch this? Did he watch that? And if you were to cut out that first bit of information and the last bit explaining why he was doing it, and you just had, did your father used to watch Star Wars? No. Oh, did he watch Star Trek? No. Oh, did he do this? Did he? You would think that was immediately fake, but with the context of, well, I got this image of stars, and now I'm trying to understand what that means. I'm not fishing for information. I'm trying to understand and how to interpret this. And context is very, very important in anything. Yeah, it is. Otherwise, anything can seem fake.
Exactly, and I think TV, it's not the best. I mean, I've done TV, myself before, so it's, who would say no? But it's definitely not the best. Medium for mediums. You know what I mean? It's hard to do it right.
It's not the best way of scientifically proving this
stuff.
No,
not scientifically at all.
No.
I look at it more for entertainment, and I'm like, listen, if it enters like the bigger everyone's consciousness a little bit more, and it's more accepted because of it, I look at that as the silver lining. Yeah. But as far as scientific,
television mediumship shouldn't be the deciding factor as to whether it's real or not.
No,
basically,
not at all. Not at all.